So, yeah, today we're really delighted to be welcoming Louisa Rodriguez from the Joy Tank, who is going to be speaking to us on a talk titled "What is Resilience Really and How do we Grow It?" And I think, Louisa, you're going to share your slides. So Louisa's going to speak for about 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up to a Q&A. And as Karen already said, we'll be recording the talk, but we'll turn that off for the Q&A. So no need to feel shy at that point. All right, Louisa, over to you. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll just get my screen up and then we'll go from there. So yeah, well, thank you very much for having me today. As I said, I'm Louisa. Just to give you a little bit of context, I'm currently a consultant in leadership, learning and development. So I go into organisations and work with leaders and organisations around sort of behavioural change and learning and development. But I've got 20 years of experience of working with people in many different contexts. I spent 10 years working in charities, working with people experiencing homelessness, mental ill health. I worked with women involved in sex work. I set up a social enterprise around post-traumatic stress disorder, and then I went into business. And I've always been fascinated by people and what is it that when people face adversity, what is it that enables some people to learn and grow from it, as opposed to some people that really struggle. And me personally, I think it's important to share this because when I look at the research, I'm like, yes, this is very relevant. 10 years ago, I myself was struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder and had to come through that. And so when I look at the research, a lot of it sort of really resonates in how I dealt with it. And so I might share little bits of those stories just to give a little bit of a context. So resilience, what is it really and how to build it? So firstly, I'm going to get you thinking. You're not going to share, don't worry, there's no sharing going to happen. But I just want you to think of a time that you faced your own challenge, own adversity, whether that was when you maybe went through a loss, you lost a job, or maybe a relationship breakdown, maybe everything kind of fell apart. And just hold that thought lightly in your mind. I don't want you to go too deep into it. And did you come through it? Did you survive it? The fact that you're on this call suggests that yes, you did. So that you've all there got some level of resilience already. And that's so when we're thinking about what is resilience, there's numerous different definitions of resilience, but essentially resilience is the capacity to adapt and recover and even grow when we're facing significant challenge. And there's sometimes a bit of a debate of, you know, can everyone have resilience? Are we born with it, or is it something that we can grow? And the research, as we'll look at, is that we can all have the capacity to develop resilience. I'm just going to share some sort of definitions as well. So the American Psychological Society defines resilience as the process of successfully adapting to difficult or challenging experiences through mental, emotional and behavioural adaptability. So it's not just the ability to come through, but it's how we adapt through that process. And interesting, the British Psychological Society, it says very similar, it involves developing personal coping skills to manage stress. But more recently, they began to focus on also the impact of the systems and the environment in which we live in, and actually the importance of the social connectedness and structural support that's around us that helps boost resilience, which we'll come and look at as we go through the talk today. But essentially, it's our resilience is a mix of sort of our environment, of our mental health, our well-being, but it's also a process that we can develop and grow. So we're going to look at sort of a bit of research in resilience and kind of get a bit deeper into it. So there's a very famous psychologist, developmental psychologist called Anne Maston from University of Minnesota. And she's seen as one of the lead people in terms of resilience. And she was really curious about resilience. And so she did some research. She looked at a group of children, all that are experiencing sort of poverty or hardship and difficult circumstances in their childhoods. And what she expected to find was something extraordinary. So these children, they must have really extraordinary traits to come through this. And actually what she found was that wasn't the case. She came up with something called resilience and ordinary magic. And she said what she found was resilience doesn't grow from specific genetics, but it comes from having safe caregiving. So having a reliable adult who shows up consistently, not lots, just one. It's just enough to have one one adult that's consistent in giving caregiving, and actually having some level of consistent routines and rhythm, so you know what you're facing day in, day out. That's another important part of resilience. And supportive communities, so having a school environment, having neighbours, people around you, and then a chance to contribute as well. So that sense of having feeling valued and able to give back to your community. And she found that these four things were really, when these four things were present, resilience wasn't rare. It was actually just these four things naturally enabled a resilience. And I think this is quite interesting because it comes back to that, actually, it's not just about us as individuals, but about the environment in which we are in and how that can either promote our resilience or make it harder. So Anne Marsden refers to these four things that make ordinary magic that naturally enables resilience. And actually that sort of gives us hope that we're all able to build resilience if we have these systems around us. So that was Anne Marsden's research, showing that actually what's around us enables resilience. And leading on from that, another psychologist from Columbia University in America, called George Bonono, he's another lead sort of researcher in terms of human resilience, and particularly around coming through bereavement and traumatic events. And he's done quite a bit of research, and again his research showed that resilience is actually more the norm for people, it's not the exception. So actually what this research is showing is that resilience is actually a part of human capability, human capacity. And he particularly did a research study, a longitudinal research study of the people that had experienced major traumas, but specifically 9/11, so 9/11 in 2001. And he studied them, and what he found was 60% of people had a mild sense of, sort of initially they had a little bit of mild distress and disruption, but actually they maintained a healthy psychological functioning. So 60% were just showed resilience naturally and were able to just sort of bounce back, if you like. And then he found that 22% of people experienced a spike. So they initially had a bit of a distress for some months, but it gradually returned to normal. So 22% were able to fully recover. And then he found that 17% experienced chronic distress, such as PTSD or prolonged grief. And then ultimately he found that 8%, actually in 8%, at the first they showed mild symptoms, but it was further down the line that time escalates. But what that shows is the 60% and the 22%, 82% of people showed that they were able to come back. The recovery took a bit longer. And again, it shows that resilience is all something that we all have, and actually a natural human response. So it's really interesting. And then just another research to do, which talks not just about actually resilience is bouncing back, but it's actually how we can grow through particularly challenging things, and actually bringing resilience together with post-traumatic growth. Now, this research study was particularly on people that had experienced some significant trauma. And this is done by Richard Tedeschi and Dr. Lawrence Calhoun. They were both pioneering psychologists, and they were the first ones to coin the term post-traumatic growth. You may have heard of that, you may have not heard of that. What that means is actually not just recovering from something traumatic, but actually from going through something traumatic and experiencing that, building resilience, you actually find a new perspective, you actually find some way to grow and learn through that experience. And what they found when people present with post-traumatic growth, and actually they found that 50 to 70% of people that experience trauma and adversity, 50 to 70% experience post-traumatic growth. And that's not just recovering from that trauma, but actually growing and learning and finding a new perspective as a result of that. And there were some things that they found in people that sort of showed post-traumatic growth. And one of those things was personal strength. So people found a personal strength of like, actually, if I can come through this, if I can handle this, I can handle anything. So they found a strength in having come through that adversity. And I know personally for me, when I went through post-traumatic stress disorder, I had this phrase, turn pain into power and purpose. And I look at some of the things that I do now, and I really believe that through the trauma I went through, it gave me a strength and a resilience to be able to do some of the things that I do now in my life. And And the other thing that came out was actually people having that open mind to see new possibilities. So as a result of going through the trauma, which actually one of the things they talked about was, as a result of the trauma, their perspective and view of the world had kind of been transformed. And actually, as a result of that, maybe they then realize, actually, the work that I'm doing or the life I'm living maybe isn't quite right for me anymore. And they have the courage to go down a new path and see new possibilities, whether that's a new career, moving to somewhere new. And what they also found in people with post-traumatic growth was improved relationships. So they talked about actually some of the superficial relationships kind of fell away, but they found deeper bonds. So they built deeper bonds, more authentic bonds and they had more compassion and empathy as a result of what they went through. And then ultimately, and I think this is I don't think this would be a particular shock. So when you've been through something traumatic, they showed a new appreciation for life. So actually valuing the smaller things, valuing the everyday experiences, and actually having a heightened sort of thought process of what truly mattered to them. So post-traumatic growth, when people sort of come through the other side, well, they come back with stronger, more personal strength, seeing new possibilities, having improved relationships and appreciation of life. And 50 to 70% of people in their research study reported post-traumatic growth, which again shows that resilience is sort of a natural part of being human. And there's some amazing inspiring examples if we look out in maybe more well-known people, such as Nelson Mandela, his 27 years in incarceration and then coming out and actually choosing forgiveness and choosing to end apartheid in South Africa, some incredible resilience to overcome what he did. Malala Yousafzai, she survived an attempted assassination by the Taliban, and she came through that and actually went on to advocate and campaign for education for women everywhere and was the youngest Nobel Peace Prize winner. So some examples there of people that arguably you could say they had post-traumatic growth. They didn't just go through something traumatic, they came through the other side with a clear sense of purpose and actually what they wanted to do. So what are some things that we see? What are the traits that we might see in people that have resilience? And some various research, again from George Bonanno, showed that people with resilience, they had an ability to think flexibly. So they didn't have a fixed mindset. They had an ability to have that growth mindset, that kind of learning mindset of, okay, what things can I try? So they had a toolbox of coping strategies and recognizing that one thing won't necessarily always work. They could try different things. So whether that was, I'm going to speak to a therapist, or okay, maybe that's not working, maybe I'm going to go do some running, or maybe it's meditation. So having that toolbox of coping strategies and being able to adapt depending on their needs and getting feedback. So actually this isn't working, maybe I need to try something new, and recognizing that not everything that everybody has different needs, and it's finding what works for you. There is no necessarily wrong or right way in terms of building resilience. It's experimenting and finding out those things that work for you. And also what he talked about was people were able to really be present and go, actually, what's happening right now? What's actually the evidence? What's the facts? What's actually happening? And focusing on that. And also some other research by Dr. Hone. She was director of the New Zealand Institute of Wellbeing and Resilience, and she actually worked in her home community after the Christchurch earthquakes. Some other things she found when she did her own research into resilience, and this is very much more of a mental perspective that she found that people with resilience had. She found that people with resilience accepted that this is not so optimistic, but suffering is a part of life. So actually, we are going to face challenges, and that's a normal part of what we're experiencing. And what she found was when people had that perspective of actually, sometimes life is going to be hard, it stopped people from feeling discriminated against and sort of going, oh, why does this always happen to me? They sort of had that more acceptance of, well, this is part of life. This is just a challenging time. It may not last, but I'll get through it. What she also found was resilient people were able to direct their attention. So our brains naturally, it's hardwired to spot threats and weaknesses. And this goes back to evolutionary psychology when we were sort of living in tribes. We need to be able to spot threats quickly, whether that's a saber-toothed tiger or someone from another tribe. And our brains haven't quite adapted to that. So we still look for those threats, and they stick to our brain a little bit more than those positive experiences we have. But what she noticed was resilient people were able to direct their attention and take, they didn't diminish the negative, but they were able to tune into the good more. So actually seeking out, where are the good things, where are the positive things that I can focus on. And then finally, and reading into the sort of the toolbox of coping strategies, feedback, and finding the right way, what she found was resilient people were able to ask, is what I'm doing helping or harming me? So is this strategy that I'm taking, is this harming me, or is this helping me? And being able to take action as a result of that. So for example, it could be, I'm really exhausted today, I've got stuck in scrolling social media. Actually, that's not going to help me. What I maybe need to do is go for a walk. That's going to be a far better thing for me. And they were able to recognize those things. And I think that comes back to also those questions we ask ourselves, where that directs our thinking. So yeah, is what I'm doing helping and harming me? Do I have a toolbox of coping strategies? And I'll come back to that a bit later, because resilience starts before we even face a challenge, in terms of how we can build those the things that support us. So it's about choosing what we need at the right time. But it's important to mention that I've talked about sort of the individual here and how individuals respond to challenges. But as I mentioned at the beginning, the British Psychological Society particularly has been focused on, it's not just about the individuals, it's also about the systems and the environment that we live in. And Anne Marston's research sort of supports this as well, in terms of the environment in which these children she did her research in. Did they have a community around them? Did they have a safe caregiver who could support them? And I've worked in business for sort of over 10 years now, and I sometimes hear about resilience, and it's a bit of a buzzword. What does that actually mean? And I think sometimes we need to be aware of, actually, are we asking an individual to be resilient, or is the system in which we're sort of existing in, is that requiring a lot of resilience because the system's maybe broken or it's not working, and actually that's putting a lot of strain on people's resilience? And we need to be realistic about the world in which we're living in. We've got the aftermath of COVID, cost of living crisis, there's a heat wave, can't ignore not acknowledge the fact that there's climate change going on. And most interestingly, and I would argue that some of these things, amongst other contexts of things that are going on, the World Health Organization has talked about a global pandemic of burnout, anxiety, and depression. And in the UK in 2023, 1.8 million there's 1.8 million days of work-related illness. 875,000 of them was stress, anxiety, and depression. And the World Health Organization also said the single deadliest occupational risk at the moment is long working hours. And actually, I can say from my own experience of working with leaders in lots of different organizations, burnout is a real thing. I'm seeing and hearing a lot of that. And I think if we look at the context of the things and what we're living in, the environment in which we're living in, we've also got things like the cost of living crisis, poverty, racism. So these systemic issues, and actually how you're asking somebody constantly to be resilient just to navigate these systems. And actually that's going to decrease people's resilience. And so actually sometimes are we asking someone to be resilient, or is it actually we need to change the environment to allow the environment for people to build those resilience? If we think about community and safe places for people. And I definitely see this a lot. I've worked in organizations where leaders have described to me systems that don't really work. The very high expectations of what's required for them in a working environment, and over a period of time, no matter how resilient someone is, that will slowly eat away at someone's resilience. And so sometimes I think the question is, do we need someone to be resilient, or does the environment need adapting? Do the systems need adapting? I think this is something which I think is really great, that the British Psychological Society is recognising the environment in which we're living in and how that's an important part of people's resilience. Which leads us on to the power of community and resilience. So resilience actually isn't something that's best done on our own. What the research suggests is actually when we're going through hard times or challenging times, community is really important. And there was some research done, again, this was by the British Psychological Society, by John Jury, a sociologist, and Daniel Aldrich. And they did some research into looking at the impact of COVID and actually the impact of social connections and community. And again, what they found was social connection. So your social connections predicted how communities fared. So where communities had strong bonds, people were connected, people felt able, they were sort of keeping an eye on each other and helping each other. They actually fared better than communities. It didn't matter about wealth or infrastructure, but the sense of community was really key to how people sort of navigated through successfully. And I think this is really important in a world where we've got high reports of loneliness on the increase. So in 2024, 2025, in the Government Community Life Survey, 7% of adults in the UK reported that they often or always felt lonely. And of that, the largest proportion of people that were reporting loneliness was between 16 to 49, which is interesting because we traditionally think of them as older people. And so, and we know that what happens when we have a good social relationships and social networks is also when we feel connected to people, it releases oxytocin, which is our bonding hormone, and actually help reduce our stress levels. So connection, so it's not, I think it's really important. And when I was researching this, I thought this is really interesting because often we think about resilience as something that's an individual responsibility. Oh, we have to be individually responsible. But actually what we forget is human beings need connections. We thrive in connection. And research shows that actually babies that don't get touched experience failure to thrive. So I'm thinking about going into the future of what the world might look like. I think that community and that sense of connection, how we build strong communities, is so important for not just individual resilience, but that community resilience, how we come together and work through things. And also what the research shows, and not just from Duran Eldrick's research, but research from the Blitz and other sort of big crisis, is when a community experiences a crisis together, that sense of shared experience makes it easier for people to come through it. And actually people don't necessarily have traumas in the way that you would think you think they would, because they sort of have this shared experience and they're going through it together. So I don't think we can talk about resilience without talking about the power of community, particularly in the time in which we're living in, and the impact that the environment in which we're living in, the community that we're living in. So that's a sort of a bit of an overview of sort of what resilience is, and that we can all have the opportunity to build it. But how do we build it? What kind of things can we do for ourselves? And I think it's important to mention that resilience isn't built in the moment that we face a challenge and adversity. We can do things to build resilience before we even face that challenge. And there's some things, this has come from some of Bono's research, but also from Werner and Smith. They did a 40-year longitudinal study of 700 children, taking them into adulthood, and sort of studying like what were the things that sort of enabled them to be resilient. And coming out again, reinforcing what I just said about community, relationships first. So one of the key and strongest predictors of resilience was having strong, caring relationships. So actually, do you have somebody in your life that you can talk to and feel safe with? Who are those people around you? And again, when they look at post-traumatic stress, post-traumatic growth, having supportive people around you can be really key in helping people recover. So relationships first. And I can definitely say from my own experience of going through post-traumatic stress, I don't think I would have got through that without my close friends and that sense of community. So really sort of building those relationships, those support networks, having them in place. And then it's about emotional regulation. So this is about, it's not denying emotions, it's not sort of not acknowledging negative emotions, but it's recognizing what your emotions are and being able to articulate that and recognize them, and doing things to support yourself in that moment, as opposed to letting those emotions sort of overwhelm you. So I guess it's how you can build that emotional regulation and those tools that enable you when you're feeling stressed to sort of help relieve that stress. And then we've got meaning making. So Viktor Frankl, I don't know if anyone's heard of him. He wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. He was in the Holocaust. He was in Auschwitz during the Holocaust. He then became a psychiatrist. And he talks in his book about he who has a will to live can overcome any sort of hardship. So actually people being able to make meaning over what's happened to them. So have some sense of a why, or what am I going to do from this? And that comes back to sort of the research around post-traumatic growth. So people seeing a sense of, oh, I've learned this, or I'm going to grow from it, but being able to make meaning from the experience, and who do I want to be as a result of that? Now I've got this new information, or I've got this new strength, how can I come through that? And then they talked about self-efficacy, and this is actually about how much control or sense of influence you have over your life. And this comes from research from Albert Bandura, and he talks about actually, am I focusing on the things that aren't in my influence, or am I focusing on the things that are like I can have control over? So people feeling like they have some form of control is a really important part of resilience. And he also talked about, again, resilience can be built before we face a big challenge by actually being willing to regularly push our comfort zone. So just getting used to being out of our comfort zone, challenging ourselves, so that we get used to dealing with those challenges when we're actually in control of those challenges, because this is my choice. It might be, for example, I love to run marathons, so I've got to go run a marathon or learn something new. And what we're doing when we're doing that is we are getting used to dealing with sort of those uncomfortable feelings, or putting ourselves in a state of stress, but that it's manageable, so that when we face really big challenges, we've already got a sort of a support strategy and a coping strategy in place to know how to handle that stress. And then physical foundations, and this is a really sort of foundational one. This is coming back to Maslow's hierarchy of need. We don't just have emotional, mental resilience, we have physical resilience. So sort of ensuring we have good sleep, eating good food, doing some form of exercise, and all of that releases dopamine and endorphins, which are sort of feel-good hormones, but actually enables us to have a good solid foundation. And if you've ever sort of been through a period where you've not been sleeping very much, you know, when some people come and ask you to do things, you may be not so tolerant as when you're actually really well slept. So actually looking after your physical body puts you in a good place when you face challenges. And then mindfulness. And again, I think this is a really important one in the world in which we're living in currently. We have so much information coming at us. So actually, where do you find time just to give your brain a rest? There's a great book by Dr. Joseph Jabelli. He's a neuroscientist, and he talks all about the power of pause and giving our brains space to stop and recover. And there's research that shows also a bit of mindfulness over 8 weeks can actually ensure that that our brains recover and we can handle our emotions in a much better way. The takeaway is resilience. We've all got the capacity to build resilience. We've all got that ability to do that. It's a process. We build it through skills, habits, and the environment we surround ourselves with. So I guess my takeaway something for you to think about is, what can you do? What one thing can you take away to build your resilience and actually build your community, build a community around you that is resilient?